Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
My family is really creeping me out. For context, I come from a very old American family. I have ancestors that arrived before 1700, mostly English and Cajun. I'm a direct descendant of Mary Todd Lincoln, which is apparently when my family got involved in everything I'm about to say. All of this becomes relevant later. Here's how it started. Be me. This was just after my 16th birthday, a little over 6 years ago. I'm with my dad and we're eating at our nose in New Orleans. We don't live anywhere down south, but he has taken every one of my siblings to New Orleans around this age. It's a family tradition. His dad took him to New Orleans, and I suppose his grandfather took his dad. My family has a lot of these traditions. Some are normal like this, others aren't. After dinner, we're walking through the French Quarter, full of weird psychics and stuff. He's totally silent, whereas normally he'd be making fun of them. He tells me he wants to tell me a story about our family. I say go for it. He says we can't talk about it in public. Okay, MP3. We get back to the hotel. He begins his story. He tells me there's a reason our family has this tradition, taking kids to New Orleans once they reach young adulthood. It's to tell them the history of our family and the role we had in American history. He tells me that, back in the day, there were a number of fraternal groups that were heavily involved in politics, basically a way for nobility elites to continue to control an increasingly democratic Western world. Started around the French Revolution. A number of nobility, including Marquis de Sade, supported the revolution immediately. They knew they didn't have a chance at maintaining the old order, and a lot of them genuinely believed in the democratic movement. Very quickly, during the Reign of Terror, they realized they had made a mistake, from their perspective at least. These fraternal societies were somewhat inspired by the Illuminati, though they are different groups. There are 3 major groups of these fraternal societies. The first one, which my family was most involved with, I'll call the Directors. Not the actual name. They believe in using different moral philosophies. This becomes really important later, and believe in democratic government as long as people are properly directed by elites who want to help them. Directors were largely behind establishing the Directory in France in 1795. Unfortunately, that government was pretty quickly overthrown by Napoleon, which is when a lot of my ancestors came to the US. The second group I'll call revolutionaries. Again, not the actual name. They believe that any moral philosophy is inherently flawed, emotional, and subjective, and that the only valid behavior is helping others. My dad says they are composed of a number of disparate groups who are constantly divided and only unify to combat the other 2 groups. Revolutionaries are responsible for a lot of communist and anarchist revolutions because their ultimate goal is to put power entirely in the hands of the people. They aren't necessarily communists or anarchists. They just support individual movements they see as anti-authoritarian. Needless to say, that has backfired a number of times. Third and final group, which is probably the worst, are the absolutists. They believe in fixed, universal, and absolute moral rules based on ancient values. They are actively anti-democratic and support dictatorship and monarchies, but only selectively. My dad says they believe that the entire purpose of humanity is to serve an enlightened minority who will control everything with absolute power. In reality, this ends up meaning they only serve themselves. At this point, I was really wondering what all of this was about, so I started asking my dad a ton of questions. It's difficult to remember what was a response to my question and what I guessed at, so the rest may not be as accurate as the above.
Many people like being told what to do by others. They don't like to think or stand apart from the herd. They are the real walking dead.
I asked my dad how my family got involved. He said that one of our ancestors back in France was a friend of Marquis de Sade. I am freaked out by this. They were in the same fraternal society. During the revolution, my ancestor and de Sade got into a bitter disagreement about what level of control their society should have. Apparently, de Sade ended up founding the revolutionary faction after this disagreement, and the 2 never spoke again. Once my ancestors fled to the US. I think this was well before the Louisiana Purchase, so it wasn't the US yet. They moved north to Kentucky. They maintained a lot of older, stranger traditions, and eventually married into powerful English families on the East Coast. Slowly, they worked their way into politics, business, banking, academia, especially philosophy, and most importantly, journalism. At one point, one of my ancestors owned dozens of papers in Pennsylvania and had extreme influence over elections. Eventually, we became moderately wealthy again, maintaining our traditions the whole time. We married into the Todd family of Mary Todd Lincoln fame, and she was born. Mary Todd Lincoln did not approve of many of the things my family did, but she was loyal and always did what was asked of her. She ended up marrying Lincoln, and with my family's guidance founded the Republican Party and became president. He would not have succeeded without the financial and political support of her family. Most importantly, he would not have succeeded without the network of newspapers they owned. For some more historical context, at this time the directors were very unpopular among the fraternal societies. The revolutionaries and absolutists had worked out their differences enough to organize a revolution in the South, though they still remained separate. America plunged into civil war, and Lincoln had to stop it. He was under a ton of pressure from my family, and Mary Todd, of course, to crush the South. Lincoln is under all this pressure. He just wants to preserve the Union, but he's getting orders through his wife. Finally, they threatened to pull newspaper and financial support for his 1864 election. Boom, Emancipation Proclamation and renewed effort to stop the South. I cannot underestimate Mary Todd Lincoln's role in this. The stress literally drove her insane. She became increasingly erratic and would fly into rages at the slightest offense. She must have had incredible weight on her shoulders. Anyway, eventually the Civil War ends, Lincoln is assassinated, and my family recedes back into the shadows. The alliance between the revolutionaries and the absolutists soured, and they split and decided to focus on politics. My family's direct political influence weakens, but we maintain all of our newspapers. Eventually, those newspapers become radio stations, TV stations, etc. all around the country. This is my family business, and many other families involved with the directors. The idea is to guide the public without directly interfering with our doing anything for our own benefit. At this point, I asked my father what exactly we're guiding people toward. He's extremely vague, but says the debate is over morality and ethical philosophy. I think this is silly and ask him why that would matter. He says it's because when you control people's moral systems, you control their behavior. Revolutionaries want people to determine their own moral system. Directors want to help people choose from a variety of moral systems for whatever benefits humanity. Absolutists want to use morality to manipulate people into serving their own interests. A lot of the weirder traditions are meant to instill different moral codes in us. For example, when we get a new pet or a new child, my family will draw a little bit of their blood and put it in wine. We will take the glass with blood in it and mix it around with other glasses.
You are not. The last direct descendant of the President and Mrs. Lincoln was Robert Todd Lincoln Beckwith. Mr. Beckwith divorced his second wife when she bore a child named Timothy Lincoln Beckwith. But there was some obvious hanky-panky there, as Beckwith had previously had a vasectomy and was infertile. So Timothy, though carrying the name, is not descended from the Lincolns. He is alive today and has no children. So even if he were descended from Lincolns, he would be the last one. And his life history does not match yours at all, so you ain't him.
I should clarify, I am not a descendant of Mary Todd Lincoln. I am a direct descendant of her father. I meant direct relative. But plenty of people involved in this are adopted or are not blood relatives. My sister is adopted, and she was invited to participate. Some aren't even in the families, but that's much less common. Okay, last one, then I need to take a break. If nobody is reading this and no one is interested, I'll just give up. But I really want some answers, if anyone knows what's going on with my family. The tradition continues like this. Everyone at the baptism of the child or in the house when the new pet arrives takes a big sip from one of the glasses. Nobody knows who got which. The only way to tell is by taste and texture. Wine and blood is a very strange flavor and mouth-feeling. Nobody is supposed to react or say anything for 24 hours. Everyone who drinks the wine reconvenes and we ask who got it. If you admit to getting it, you get punished as though you did something wrong. One time I had my GameCube taken for a month. I was furious. If you don't admit, everyone gets punished, but not badly. Less food at dinner, for example. It's supposed to make you choose whether you will sacrifice yourself for everyone else's benefit. Anyway, that's all I have for now. The reason this is creeping me out is because as I get older, I'm realizing more and more how abnormal my family is. If you Anons want to hear more, I can write more or answer questions. But mostly, I just want answers. What is my family involved with? Every time I ask, my dad says that as I'm older, I'll learn more. I don't know what that means.
I've heard of a similar thing. In another tale, a boy is sacrificed with animals, and all the meat is cooked together. Anyone who eats human flesh in the stew becomes a wolf for 9 years.
All right, looks like a few of you want some more, so I'll give a few more details of what I can remember. Do any of you guys have any legit guesses as to what's going on? It's sort of like that, but I don't know if that captures the point. It's sort of like when your teacher punishes the whole class for not telling who drew a dick on the board, except there's no reason for it. So most of our family traditions aren't as gruesome as the blood thing, but are just as weird. We all have learned certain poems about morality. I remember one which goes, intense, lengthy, certain, speedy, pure. Such measures of pleasures and pains endure. Such pleasures seek all their private ends. If they're public, wide let them extend. Such pains avoid, whichever be your view. If pains must come, let them extend to few. I'm convinced my family is in a cult. I don't know what's real and what isn't, but my dad's friends are just as weird as he is. One is a sociologist at a university who is very influential in his field, which is deviant behavior. This guy is really bizarre. He talks in riddles and drinks a lot. I mean a lot. A lot of people in and around my family drink a lot. Other people include my uncle, who died a few years back of cancer, who seemed obsessed with finding the family genealogy. My parents would leave for hours a couple times a month for social club meetings, and my dad later told me these were directory meetings. They separate men and women for different purposes, but my dad isn't allowed to tell me what they do unless I join. He used to want me to join until he convinced my older brother to join. I guess he wants to keep the family in it. The invitations were always very friendly. A "why don't you come along" type thing. My whole life it's just sort of been in the background, something we don't talk about. The only time it really comes up is when we talk about the news. My dad is an expert at knowing which faction placed which stories in the news. The directors plant the most, but absolutists and revolutionaries have a good deal of influence too. A lot of op-eds and opinion articles, but sometimes they're presented as news. Basically, anytime there is a moral justification in the news, it's probably them. Within a given faction, there will be people on different sides of issues, but they will give the same types of moral justifications or use the same ethics. Apparently, my grandpa was really involved in getting the United States into World War II, partially, to stop the Depression and guide people toward a better society. Other directors thought it would be better to only sell arms to the Allies or even both sides, but the point is there are different factions within the factions. There's a lot more history my dad has taught me about. I guess he isn't allowed to talk about the current or more recent activity of the fraternal societies, because he gets really vague about that. I'm really after answers, guys. Ask whatever you need to. Or better, just tell me what's going on. I'm just trying to figure this out.
Anon. If all this is true, you need to take out your father and the rest of your family as soon as possible. Come with him to one of those meetings. Bring a Mac Milli in your pocket. Start popping everyone in the head. Just do it anon. You need to. It'll save the rest of us from your family's control. Also, you need to post some sort of proof. Name 1 or 2 news sources or radio stations that your family has control of.
I've thought about it, but from what I can tell, his and their intentions are genuinely positive. Maybe he just tells me that to make me more comfortable with it. And regarding the proof post, I'd love to. I'm really terrified of being traced, though. I'm not ready to put this all out in the open in a way that people can do something about. I'm more worried about absolutists. Also, I should clarify how we control papers and radio. TV we have less control of. It isn't that we just own it. Most media is owned by conglomerates anyway. We implant journalists, managers, administrators, editors, etc., who are in the family or other families. And to the person who asked, I was raised Protestant, and as far as I know, there's no other ancestry.
Isn't that exactly what someone who didn't want their son to turn away would want you to think, though? You need to find out for sure his intentions are good. You need to learn of more things this group has done to change society, that have proof to the point where you can believe it, and determine the true nature of his group. Go with your dad to meetings. Listen in on his conversations. The problem with this kind of thing is that even if the intentions are good, good intentions don't always mean that it's what's best for society. And a small group of people having control over what people think like that isn't a good thing. Just because it's working now doesn't mean it's what's best for humanity. On top of that, it's much easier for 10 men to change their views to something sinister than it is for 1,000 who keep each other in check. Humans are selfish creatures. I doubt the intentions of this group is truly selfless.
That's a really good point. I don't know if I'm welcome anymore after my brother got involved. There's sort of an unspoken rule about one son per generation taking this on. I bet I could get in a meeting if I really tried to. If I do, I'll report back. Something became crystal clear about half an hour ago while I was out drinking. That sociologist friend of my dad's studies deviance. In particular, he studies cults and obscure religious practices. I wonder now if the reason he knows my dad is because he was investigating whatever fraternal society my dad belongs to. Now he drinks, knowing he can't tell anyone or talk to anyone about it beside my dad. I remember a conversation I heard when I was younger. You saying listen in on his conversations brought it right back. It gave me that feeling that I was hearing something I wasn't supposed to, that gut-dropping feeling you have when you hear your parents talking about divorce. Be me, maybe 12 or 13. Dad comes home from bar in a distant city. 2 men in Navy suits follow him, and the sociologist friend. Watching from my room down the hall, they don't know. They are talking about politics, new technology, pretty ordinary stuff. One of the guys in suits says, "So about the last meeting," and then paraphrasing, "We need to take care of the veterans." I was unsure what he meant by veterans. Father agrees, sociologist is taking notes. They start drinking and having laughs at the sociologist saying he doesn't know anything. Apparently veterans are upset with the direction things are going, saying it goes against the charter. They start arguing over elections in economic terms I don't understand. Eventually they come to some sort of agreement, saying they will honor the charter as long as they can keep the veterans out of it and pass the next resolution in the Spartan Committee. Ask my dad about it the next morning over breakfast. He tells me eavesdropping is wrong and that he'll explain it when I'm older. Google all of these terms and decide my dad is a spy. We joke about this until we eventually visit New Orleans and he explains all of this to me. I'm remembering a lot of weird stuff from my childhood. It feels good to get a lot of this off my chest. I don't know if I'll keep updating this, but I'll keep checking back. A few questions. Any of you have any idea what the Spartan Committee is? Anyone know what he meant by veterans the charter? Is my dad a spy or some sort of government agent? That would make sense, but wouldn't explain the rituals, I guess. OP here. If anyone is still listening, my dad is going to let me come to one of the meetings. It's tomorrow night. There was one Sunday night, but I needed to think things over before going. My brother went with him as usual. I did have one other memory, a couple weeks after my dad first told me all of this. At home, sitting on the porch, Mom makes us iced tea. Just relaxing, me and my dad, talking about school, life, girls, etc. Normal father and son.jpg. I try to casually bring up what he told me in New Orleans. He gets a little irritated and says we shouldn't talk too much about it. Ask him why people want to control others. He gets more irritated, says that every time revolutionaries take hold somewhere it backfires and people end up having less control. The world needs balance and moderation, he says. Everyone is hungry for power, but true power is restraint. That lesson stuck with me. I don't necessarily believe it's right to control people, but maybe he's right. Maybe people do need guidance. I'll go to the meeting tomorrow night and let you guys know.
No, OP, you're becoming one of them.
But maybe he's right. Maybe people do need guidance, says the guy whose grandfather pushed for the murder of millions of people. Says the guy who does blood rituals. Says the guy who is too fucking dumb to see that advanced systems work through the complexity of the many and not the few. You're calling into the same organizational trap as the communists. You simply do not have the resources to micromanage the world or even guide it. But you will sell the soul of humanity to an AI so you can live in comfort, as if that's life at all. Nothing can compare to an organic society. But then you love destroying those, don't you? They're inconvenient for you. I should point out that honest leadership is superior to subterfuge, lies, and manipulation. If you respect people, you would want them to live honest, good, and fulfilling lives. People lead neither now, and they certainly don't realize any higher mystery to the world. They're all spiritually dead, complacent cattle. Admittedly, they are easy to tug around. But you can't lead a herd that isn't willing to follow, and a herd that's not healthy isn't worth leading at all. It's better to die an honest man than survive as a coward. Don't be a coward, my man. They lead you into these traps through family loyalty. Eventually the family fades, as they all do, and they find another host. Don't let them.
That's a really, really good point. I'm just trying to make sense of it all. It's really hard to come to terms with this. I've basically been trying to ignore this and make my own way in life for years. A question for all before I leave. How do I go about this meeting? I don't really know what to expect. My dad just told me to be sure to be very well groomed and wear a suit.
First of all, remember that the world isn't a battle between a few factions. That's the biggest mistake people do. Separate things in black and white groups, left versus right, globalists versus nationalists, directors versus revolutionaries versus absolutists. Remember that there's a very high chance the group is just one of the cogs in the unimaginably complex system that keeps the world running, and there's a good chance they just LARP to feel important, which is not unique to them. Almost all high-class groups do this, be the Masons, your factions, gov officials. Many of them think they're more important than they are, especially the family-based ones. Also, that thing your father said, that power means sacrificing personal liberty, is very much true. No one will ever be an absolute ruler. You'll always need a group and to follow rules, and if you break them, you'll be out. That is, to control. You must let yourself be controlled. At least that's how humans are. If we became a hive mind or AI, obviously it'd be very different. I'd say you need to be very careful and not be naive at all. Everything has a reason, even if it's just personal pride, and if the questions whose answers are because it just works, or it is because it is, are the questions you'll need to look into the most. Remember, you're going to see how things work, but you're not part of their group yet. So far, you're a skeptic, a free particle, and that's rare among all of humanity. Most people there are there because of tradition and don't think much about it. Use your brain, analyze everything, try to see everyone's viewpoints, both your family, your enemies, the ones you control, the ones that control you, and the ones you've nothing to do with. And I know this because I have family members who are Freemasons, and I've seen how they work, and I can tell you it's just a corruption ring filled to the brim with pretentious bags who think they actually matter, when they're just an organization out of 1,000 others made to facilitate corruption, money laundering, and opportunity stealing, getting CEOs, managers, etc., that will die very soon as the internet grows more and more, and people become more aware of their surroundings. People say we're closer as ever to getting a new world order, when it's actually the opposite. The ones who are in control, like the Freemasons, are all becoming increasingly weak. They're all desperate, which is why they are trying so many blatant and desperate attempts to gain control, throwing communities against each other. I'd say learn as much as you can from it, but keep in mind all these secret societies are as weak as they could ever be. The internet, technology, and free speech is making it increasingly harder to control the masses. So I highly advise you to not join it unless you want to be on the front lines of a sinking ship. Living your own life might make them dislike you, but you'll gain personal freedom you wouldn't gain anyway inside any secret control group, like your pap said.
They have the internet in the bag. Most browsing is done in just a couple of highly controlled sites.
The control they have is like the control China has over the internet, in the sense that although they try very hard, they're still not able to fully take off the information from a minority, and with time that minority just grows. The most important part of societies like Freemason is knowledge. Books were extremely expensive, so were college and technical skills, and very few had them. These few ended up being able to control others by simply having and withholding information from them. Indoctrination and making a dumb society was the easiest thing for those that had even the slightest knowledge of the world or psychology. Today, they still control a lot of the most popular websites, but it's still very much possible to learn what you want, if you want, even in China, and they'll never be able to take that off. Everyone knows what an IP is. Everyone knows that it's very easy to visit non-popular sites and forums. I'm sure everyone in 4chan has visited an underground website or masked their IP at least once, or at least they know how to do it. The more they try to control the internet, the more people learn how to surpass it. Remember net neutrality? If they actually passed it, literally everyone would have learned how to do some kind of hacking. They're forced to not hold control of these things because if they do, everyone will uprise. It's the sign they're losing. The New World Order, secret society, and globalist strategy is failing. and the elite are being forced to move to other strategies if they don't want to be beheaded. And gladly for us, those other strategies give us the perfect opportunity to make people know how the world works, which more and more people are learning exponentially. The secret society's smartest men know this strategy is doomed, so they're abandoning it and trying to find the quickest way to grab what they can grab, then leave history and live a safe, retired life away from all they controlled. It's the French Revolution all over again.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.
There's also a Rumble archive as a backup.